They called it the day the North died, September 25th, 1066, during a river crossing in Yorkshire. What happened there in the next 6 hours would determine whether England remained English or became the final jewel in a Viking empire that stretched from Greenland to the gates of Baghdad. But here's what nobody tells you about Stamford Bridge. The man who won it would be dead in 3 weeks. Harald Hardrada's resume reads like a fantasy novel. Exiled from Norway at 15, mercenary commander in Byzantium by 20, leader of the Varangian Guard, the Byzantine emperor's personal death squad by 30. He'd crushed rebellions in Sicily, fought pirates in the Mediterranean. He is 6.5 feet tall when most men barely cleared 5'6". 18 pitched battles, and he was never defeated. By 1066, he wasn't just a king. He was a living weapon that pointed itself at England and said, "Mine." But he made one mistake. He brought the wrong brother.
If you want to hear more stories like this, battles where strategy defeated strength, where the impossible became real, where one decision changed the course of nations, then subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of history.
Tostig Godwinson had been the Earl of Northumbria, basically the governor of northern England, until his own people rebelled against his brutality in 1065. His brother Harald, newly crowned King of England, had a choice: civil war or sacrifice his own blood, but he chose the kingdom. So Tostig fled to Norway, with his hatred still burning, and he whispered the one thing that would bring Hardrada across the North Sea. "My brother is weak, give me ships, and I'll give you England." Hardrada believed him and gave Tostig 300 longships and 10,000 warriors, the largest Scandinavian invasion force in half a century. They landed in September, and for 5 days it looked like Tostig was right. On September 20th, 1066, at Fulford Gate, just outside York, the northern English earls Edwin and Morcar tried to stop Hardrada with everything they had: 5,000 men, good terrain, and desperation. But they only lasted 3 hours on the battlefield. The battle turned into a slaughter. Survivors fled into the marshes. York surrendered the next day without a fight. Hardrada demanded hostages and supplies. The exchange would happen at Stamford Bridge, a nothing little crossing 8 miles east of the city. The Norwegians left most of their armor at the ships in Rickall, thinking, why would they need chainmail for a handover ceremony? But that decision killed them all. While Hardrada was accepting York's surrender, Harald Godwinson was doing something medieval armies simply don't do. He was in London when the news arrived. Vikings are in York, and your brother rides with them. Most kings would have waited, gathered forces, and planned. But Harald moved immediately, with 11,000 men, to embark on a distance of 190 miles within 4 days. That's nearly 50 miles per day, double the normal pace, through September mud, in full gear with no supply train. But on their way, men dropped from exhaustion, and Harald left them behind, because speed was the only advantage he had, and it worked. On September 25th, at dawn, Harald's scouts crested the hills above Stamford Bridge and saw the impossible. 10,000 Vikings were scattered across the meadows, half naked while some are bathing in the river, completely unaware that an entire English army was 400 yards away. Hardrada spotted the glint of English spears, and he realized immediately this wasn't a raid. This was the entire English army. He had minutes to decide. He sent a blocking force to the bridge, a number of 400 men, and tried to form the rest into some kind of defensive position. But Harald didn't attack yet. He rode to the riverbank and called for his brother. Tostig emerged from the Norwegian lines. The two men, who'd grown up together, fought together, and ruled together, stared at each other across 20 feet of water. Harald's voice carried across the silence. "Come back, and I'll restore Northumbria. Everything you have lost will all be forgiven." For a moment, the sagas say, Tostig actually considered it. Then he asked the question that would seal both their fates. "And what of Harald Hardrada? What will you give him?" Harald's reply was immediate. 7 feet of English ground, or more, since I'm told he's taller than most men. A grave, he meant. Then Tostig rode back, without saying a word, because war was the only language left. The English hit the Vikings' blocking force like a landslide. These were Harald's housecarls, professional warriors, the best infantry in Europe, crashing into a makeshift shield wall of Norwegians who knew they were buying time with their lives. They held for 20 minutes. Then the line buckled. The survivors started pulling back across the bridge, but they were still fighting, still organized. And that's when the saga was born. One Viking, history never recorded his name, stayed behind. The bridge at Stamford was narrow, wide enough for maybe 3 men abreast, and this Norwegian giant, wielding a two-handed axe, planted himself dead at the center. What happened next defies belief. The English charged, and he killed them. They tried rushing him in groups, 6, 8, 10 at a time. But he cut them down like they were children. For 40 minutes, this single man held the entire English army on the wrong side of the river. The Chronicle says he killed 40 men, while some sources say he killed more. Harald's commanders were so stunned, they offered him terms: gold, safe passage, and his life. He roared something in Norse and kept swinging. So an English soldier, whose name is also lost, stripped off his armor, slipped into the river, waded beneath the bridge, found a gap in the wooden planks, and drove his spear upward. Then the blade of the spear punched through the Viking's groin. He dropped, and the river carried him away. The bridge was open, but the delay had given Hardrada exactly the time he needed. By the time the English crossed, Hardrada had formed his army into a shield fortress on rising ground east of the river, a circular wall defended on all sides. It looked impressive, but it was actually a death sentence. Tostig begged him to retreat, fall back to Rickall and link up with the 3,000 Vikings still guarding the ships. This time, they'd have armor, numbers, options. But Hardrada refused. Why? Nobody knows for certain. Maybe pride, because he has never retreated in 50 years of warfare. If you know the reason, kindly comment it down below, and this is what I believe. He knew, deep down, that this was always the ending, not in a throne room, but here, blood and mud with steel. Harald's army surrounded them completely. Then the killing began. It wasn't a fair fight. The English attacked from every direction at once. Fresh troops rotated in every few minutes. The Vikings, many without armor, fought like cornered wolves, but the circle kept shrinking. Then the English archers opened up. Volleys at close range into packs of unarmored targets. The slaughter intensified. One arrow, loosed by a man we'll never know, arced high over the melee. It came down through Harald Hardrada's throat. The King of Norway staggered and tried to speak, but he couldn't. Blood poured between his fingers, and he dropped to his knees, then onto his side, while sword still in his hand. Harald Sigurdsson, Hardrada, the thunderbolt of the north, the last great Viking king, dead in a battlefield 800 miles from home. For a heartbeat, both armies just stopped. Then Tostig Godwinson pushed through the Norwegian ranks and grabbed the fallen land-waster banner and raised it high. Harald called for a ceasefire, while his voice rang across the corpse field, "Your king is dead. Surrender now, and I'll give you ships, your lives, and go home." That was more fair and more generous, but Tostig's answer was raising the banner higher. "Come and take it," he said. Harald stared at his brother for a long moment, then turned his horse and rode back to his lines. What followed wasn't a battle. It was an execution. The English fell on the remnant like a pack of starving dogs. The shield wall disintegrated into individual death struggles scattered across the hillside. Tostig died somewhere in that chaos, and the chronicles don't even record how, just that they found his body later, still gripping a broken sword. By mid-afternoon, the battle was over. Then the war horn sounded from the south. Eystein Ore, Hardrada's son-in-law, had been guarding the ships at Rickall when a messenger arrived screaming about the English. He grabbed every able-bodied Vikings, 3,000 men, and force-marched them 15 miles in full armor under the September sun. They arrived to find their king dead and a field carpeted with Norwegian corpses. Then Eystein charged anyway. His men were so exhausted they could barely lift their weapons. They were dehydrated, overheated, and stumbling. The sagas call his attack Or's Storm. It lasted for 20 minutes before it shattered completely. Then it became a foot race. Vikings fleeing toward Rickall, English cutting them down from behind. By sunset, the killing finally stopped. The field at Stamford Bridge looked like an abattoir, bodies 3 deep in places. The Derwent ran red, and crows already circling. Harald had won decisively, but he'd lost 2,000 men, a quarter of his army. His elite housecarls were badly depleted. The Vikings had it worse. Of maybe 10,000 who'd invaded, perhaps 500 of them survived. The chronicles say 300 longships brought them from Norway, but 24 carried the survivors home. Let that sink in. 300 to 24. That's not a defeat, that's genocide. Harald Godwinson stood victorious. He had just achieved what no English king had done in generations, completely annihilated a Viking invasion in a single day. He had every reason to celebrate. Instead, he stood among the dead and waited. 3 days later, the messenger arrived. William of Normandy had landed at Pevensey Bay with 7,000 men. He was fortifying the coast and issuing challenges. Harald had no choice. Then he turned his shattered, exhausted army around and marched south. 250 miles, 12 days, with no rest. October 14, 1066, at Senlac Hill, near Hastings, Harald's depleted housecarls formed a shield wall and held against wave after wave of Norman cavalry. For hours it seemed impossible the English could lose. Then Harald took an arrow to the face. By nightfall, he was dead. His army scattered, and William of Normandy became William the Conqueror. England would never be English again. Here's what keeps historians awake at night. If Stamford Bridge hadn't happened, if Harald had faced William fresh with his full army, with 3 weeks to prepare instead of 3 days, would the Normans have won? Almost certainly not. Stamford Bridge didn't just kill 10,000 Vikings, it killed England's chance at survival. But it revealed something more important. The Viking Age didn't end because the Northmen lost their courage or their ships or their gods. It ended because the world evolved past them. Harald's forced march wasn't just impressive. It was a statement. We're not victims anymore. We're organized, we're fast, and we're coming for you. The Vikings at Stamford Bridge weren't defeated by better warriors. They were defeated by a civilization that had learned to mobilize faster than raiders could strike. That's the real story of Stamford Bridge, not heroism or evolution. Somewhere in Yorkshire, there's a field, green, peaceful, and quiet now. Nothing marks what happened there except a small plaque most people drive past without noticing. But on September mornings, when the mist rolls off the Derwent, locals say you can still hear them. Clash of steel, screams, war cries in a dead language. 10,000 men died there in 6 hours, and when they fell, 3 centuries of Viking terror fell with them. The longships would never come again. The North had died, and the world moved on without it.